Here to talk about how to tell your story and how to help make your company investable are Chelli Miller and Jeff Walker from Carnivores, and also Dave Politis with the David Politis Company, and Jack Boren with Epic Ventures. Come on up. Hey, John.
I know. Thank you.
Have a great panel.
Thank you. You know what?
I'm going to plug in my phone because my phone's almost dead. So.
This is going to be a very casual discussion, and because there's really no rhyme or reason to raising money these days. So it is a free-for-all. And we have some interesting group on the panel here. Jeff Walker from Carnivores. We're a digital marketing group that really helps the life science business, med tech, hard tech, tell their stories, get the word out, and try and help them raise money when possible. So I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Dave Politis.
Hi. So my name is David Politis, and I've got 37 plus years of experience doing everything from PR to investor relations to marketing communications. I've been a CMO multiple times, and also I'm currently doing marketing services on a fractional basis for hire. I've helped take companies public. I've helped companies prepare to get acquired. And a big part of what I do is helping companies figure out what the crap it is they do and how to explain it so that the average person will understand to create value and drive revenue.
Jack.
Hey everybody, I'm Jack Boren. I'm a managing partner at Epic Ventures. We're a local early stage focused venture capital firm. About a third of what we do is healthcare related. It's a broad mandate for us, so everything from pure provider IT solutions like a Health Catalyst or Collective Medical all the way over to drug discovery like Recursion Pharmaceuticals. That's the team that I lead at Epic, so glad to be here, glad to represent, and hopefully there's some nuggets that are useful for all of you, and if not, well, hopefully you forget them quickly. So.
My name is Chelli Miller. I am VP and partner at Carnivores. I kind of come from the trenches. I started working with a media group in New York City. Our signature event was an investor event, early social media, so this dates back about 15, almost 20 years ago. I used to run the presenting company side of an investor conference, and investors used to come to me and say, Chelli, what companies do you like? I'm opinionated, and I don't have a problem saying, I like that one. And it was usually because it was something not on a tear sheet, because the front office was really cool. I could understand their technology. I'm a layperson, and I could understand what they were doing. Fast forward to where I am today is because those same presenting companies said, Chelli, how do we get your investor friends to come to our presentation? And their response would be, well, we sent a press release. I'm like, who reads your press release? And that turned into what should we do. So 15, 20 years later, I get to be part of this panel to talk about some of that.
Great. So do we have a slide, tech team? If you could put that up. So I took a little poll with you from the Whova app and just asked who's raising money. And no surprise, everybody's raising money. So there's some that are raising money a little bit later. Some are waiting till they're out of school. But pretty much everybody is looking to kind of get into the game at some point, which is good. So I kind of looked at companies that I've worked with recently, that Chelli's worked with as well, that might be at the same point as you, right? In the same class, the same types of things, the same stage of raise. And I thought we'd play a little bit of games to start with right here. And we have, in the first slot, we've got basically, have a look at this, Men's Health Device. They closed a B. They had 14 clinical sites. This is how they spent that B round. They basically grew their staff. They made a lot of noise about having half their women in leadership, which was part of that diversity play, which is great. And now they're going out to raise, more money again. And their big story too is an LOI for $10 million. The Women's Health Device closed an A. They had $1 million in grants, 30 patients in a study. They also said hires. And they've got a notable $1 million advance for their lead. So again, you see the trend. We're looking at money. How do you spend that money on trials, team, and then you need to raise more money. So the point is you're never going to stop raising money. So how do you keep the train going? And that's kind of what the panel is really going to focus on. The next one is cancer therapeutics. They've been successful raising money for quite a while, multiple trials, science, partners with 3 majors, and they're about to IPO. And the last one is who's going to get the funding faster and who's going to raise the most money. Any guesses? You got 1 IPO, 2 devices, 1 gene therapy. The IPO? Yep. Yep, they've got all that set up, and that's ready to go. So interestingly enough, it's the earliest one. They've just barely closed an A. They're going to their B. They're in gene therapy, and they're going to raise $60 million. First column, they're raising 10. Second column, 25. And believe it or not, this IPO is only like $15 million. So in other words, like I said at the start, it doesn't make any sense, right? Who's getting funded? Why are they getting funded? How does this sort of work? To me, that is sort of like an incredible story. So I wanted to ask Jack first. If we've got people who have raised money, and then they're going to spend it on trials and hires, and then raise more money, how does that play for somebody like you? Like, what are you thinking about in terms of that trajectory? Because everybody's on that same path, right? Here's our milestones. They all line up.
So, fortunately, the answers only get better from this one. You know, I will say, regardless of what industry you're in, be it, you know, life science, like let's say a single target drug discovery business, or all the way over on the other side, like a pure software as a service business, like the end goal of raising capital is to build a great standalone business. In my opinion, should be a business that could be public, could operate privately at a highly profitable margin, could eventually be a great company. And so the design of funding should be in some way, shape, or form to get you closer to that goal. You know, otherwise you're just raising capital to stay alive, and it's not great for anybody. So I'm not sure I fully understand the entirety of the question here, but as I think about this, this hamster wheel, let's say, of raising venture capital financing, when you raise money from me, I'm going to want you to build to a certain stage, certain milestones, certain scale of business, additional proof points, et cetera, that will either A, turn you into a standalone business where you don't need to raise any more venture capital funding, or B, make you an attractive target for another company, another venture capital firm like myself, that can, you know, go through that same motion, right? Either A, get you to that standalone whatever, or B, make you attractive for the next group down the line. When you raise venture capital, you're getting on a timeline with us. Our fund life cycle, as we like to say, is about 10 years, meaning our capital will be outstanding for about 10 years. If we give you money today, we're hoping for an outcome in the next decade. And you need to get on a timeline of performing, of growing, of building this business that meets our needs. And I'd say it's worth asking yourself the question as to, A, can your business fit that timeline? And B, do you want to be on that timeline as well? Do you want to meet the expectations of, you know, an investor that probably gets a little bit of what you're doing but might not be fully informed? Might be, you know, you're bringing on a new partner. Or do you want to seek alternative funding, or do you want to grow more slowly? Or, you know, there are other avenues for building a successful business. So, I don't know, hopefully those are some points that illustrate some of my general musings.
No, absolutely. It's the hamster wheel. It's the treadmill of milestones and how important they are. But there's also more to it. And Chelli, can you talk a little bit about how you would keep people like that interested, or especially at an early stage? What do those milestones mean, and how do they communicate? How do they become relevant to Jack?
Sure. You know, this morning, our opening panel with the CEO panel, I think really laid the track nicely for this talk. I mean, we had one of our CEOs that was saying that you needed to set your expectations in a linear fashion. And I think that's cool. That's a cool visual, and I thought that was right. You start off with, what is your story? And you need a really good story. And it needs to be a really good story. And it needs to be a story that you can tell your mother and her eyes light up. Not glaze over, lights up. She gets it, okay? And then your next milestone is going to be, or your next point of communication is going to be, and this is what we did during this time, and then, and so on. And so this is, say we have a 10-year timeline, it's going to be a continuous linear experience of communicating, packaging your story, refining your story, packaging it again, repackaging it again, telling it in this channel, telling it in this channel. I mean, we repackage all day long because it's just, you know, you have a story, but you have to connect with your audience. You have to communicate it. So I think that 10-year timeline is pretty cool because it's like, okay, but that's a 10-year communications marketing strategy right there. And how are we going to feed those audiences and those critical investor audiences the information that they want to see and the way they want to see it all the way along?
Great. David, anything to add to that?
Well, the thing that I would probably say is your comment there, Chelli, reminded me in the tech space, those of you who've been here in Utah a while, what Novell used to call the rolling thunder strategy. If you can imagine a thunderstorm coming across the plains, getting closer and closer and closer, and you can see the bolts of lightning, you can hear the sound getting louder and louder and louder, that is how they would handle their PR. That is how they would handle their marketing. That is how they would handle their messaging. And so when you're talking about, classically, we're talking 10, 12 years, $1 billion plus to take a new drug to market, how do you then map that out to say, if we are successful along the way, how do we continue to build our visibility, our credibility, our story along the lines of a rolling thunder strategy? So that would be the one thing I would add. However, there's actually there's a data point that's missing here. I'm curious on number one or number two if either one of them was going to be a 510K. Because if it was, that's the faster path to revenue, profitability, and potentially an exit. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you showed cancer therapeutics, I'm like, they're a ways out. Mm-hmm. And in this market, I don't know that anybody's in a, I don't know what you're thinking about IPOs. I think it's going to be crushed at least until August, September, October, November. I don't see a lot of IPOs this year.
But Dave, there's all of that preparation. I mean, come on.
I agree.
$1
I
million
agree.
to get in line.
But that's going to be the hard one to go and have an exit.
So that is it's a tough one because they are also doing therapeutics in a different model. I won't get into how they're doing it, but it's a little different path as well. So they're having a hard time, and this kind of leads into what we're talking about, which is telling your story. If they are just using the 0.4 cancer therapeutics, working off of a different model than anybody else is doing, which is a harder story to tell. How do we go about getting that point across so that people understand it?
Well, and to that point, if I could jump in here,
Yeah, please.
Jeff, I think that you've already touched on it, which is it starts with education. How is your pathway going to be different than what's been done before? And what's the likelihood for you achieving success? Because if you're not following a similar model to what's been done for decades, I'm concerned as a potential investor, whether that's from a VC standpoint or strategic, I want to know that my money is actually going to pay off. And if not, then I'm going to walk away. So that's a big part of that is education. It is the telling of the story.
And part of the question is really about how do you stand out in a crowded market. Obviously, therapeutics, everybody, it's a gold rush. There was, a lot of buzz around it. But now, what does that mean, right? How do you explain it? What is your point of difference when so much of it is very similar? Chelli?
So, I'm a mom by trade. So I will say, I think that companies need to start early and start exploring your community and your category as early as possible. How do you stand out in a crowd? You be human. You speak human. I go back to the mother example of and when I first started working in this industry, I would, study what was coming my way, and then I would go talk to my mom, and I would watch her face. I would watch her body language. Is she connecting? Is she getting it? She was my best mentor. I mean, I learned so much from her, but I'm not kidding. It's like, if you can speak your story in such a way that people light up, then you've connected. And then you got to keep them lit up by not going too deep, too soon and too much into the science. You got to start early. You got to know your audience. I love the founders who start either a Facebook account or a Twitter account, and they're just a human being, and they're out there, they're exploring what's being said. Who are the affinity groups that are doing what in my category? Who are the leaders in this category? Who's publishing? Who's talking? What events? How can they contribute? And then suddenly Stealth Company comes out with a real name and a little placeholder website, and they come out and say, hey, guess what, new community? I'm doing this, and this is part of the community. And all of a sudden, you've got friends and loyalists that are saying, rah, that's great. But that founder spent a little bit of time, maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes a day, building and researching the community. It's not something an intern can do. It's really got to be something that one of the founders does. It's personal.
Great, and I'll give you one example. I just heard something just a moment ago in one of the rooms where they were talking about how they had a deal, but the deal went kind of like south pretty quickly. But then somebody saw a video of theirs on YouTube, and they tended up to be a partner, and they ended up saving the deal. Okay, that's a simplification of it. We see that fairly common. I mean, I can tell you a couple of other stories where somebody is trying to talk to Apple, but Apple doesn't talk to anybody unless you know somebody. But then all of a sudden, somebody decided to do a little poking around. Apple called them up and said, you know what, you publish things, it seems to be on the same track as we like to publish things, it's the same vibe, and so why don't you come in and talk to us, right? So I mean, just little things like that that are invisible behind the scenes. And part of this panel too is, Jack, you know, you get 100 pitches a week at least or whatever. You know, does any of that, what I just said, matter, right? In terms of, do you look at, or is it just marketing, just, you know, yeah, we think we can, you know, change the current, but.
You know, it's a really interesting question. So if you step back and from the investor perspective, first off, there are more VCs today than there ever have been. We'll see how that changes
More money
next year, right? I mean,
looks like a cool job.
there was more money last year. This year's a little different. Hopefully everybody's up to speed on the news. So, you know, certainly interesting times. We'll see how that progresses. But there are a ton of VCs out there. There's more competition in my space than there ever has been. And we're all fielding such a wide breadth of deals coming into the top of our funnel. And VCs have a really hard time prioritizing the narrowing down of that funnel, right? As we think about our sales, like we might get, the number for me is a little bit less than 100 a week, but on an annual basis, it might be, you know, 400 or 500 real conversations that I have, not just like a deck I look at, but like real conversations with an entrepreneur that I then personally have to, you know, kind of filter out to, you know, on average I do like 3 deals a year, right? So it's a really steep decline.
That's not uncommon, by the way. The ratio is about right. You know, 500 calls, personal calls, 2-3 deals.
So we are desperately looking for ways to. Hi, Allison. It's nice to see you. Friendly faces in the audience is nice. We're desperately looking for ways to prioritize our funnel, and we're looking for any sort of sentiment indicators on a business. At the end of the day, venture capital is a momentum-driven business. We're not value investors. We're looking for high-growth plays, and so anything that makes you stand above the crowd is good. And I really appreciate volume over value in content from companies, right? Like I was just in the waiting room out there talking with Andy Olson at Inherent Biosciences, if you guys know that business. And Andy does a great job of producing high volume content, just talking about new releases, talking about hires, talking about, you know, any little random update that goes on in the business. And not a lot happens on a week-to-week basis at a small business, right? But he talks about it. And so I think about Andy a lot now. Andy's also a good personal friend, so I do think about him for other reasons. But I see him, I recognize it. It reminds me that I should reach out to him. It's a way for him to stay above, you know, all the noise for me. And so, yeah, you know, having I'm going to say, like, doesn't even need to be incredibly quality content, but just as long as you're out there on a regular basis, it's a good way to remind us and help us keep you top of mind.
David.
If I could add to the comment you just made, I think it's really critical. by show of hands, how many of you either are today or have been an executive of or a founder of a biotech, biomed, pharma company? I'm curious. Okay. So that's the business you're in, right? Or you were in. You know what else you're in as far as a business is concerned? You're a media company. You're a publisher. And if you don't know that, I'm going to smack you upside the head, okay? Because the reality is every individual, if you have a smartphone, you're a publisher. If you have a Facebook account, you're a publisher. LinkedIn account, you're a publisher. You have a website, you're a publisher. If you're doing posters or papers or reports, you're a publisher. And so that doesn't mean you're not an interventional cardiology company or a drug discovery company. It means you're a publisher. The moment that you can make that switch mentally, you will see the trajectory of your business change, because this is a world that is driven by content. And if you want to attract the attention of somebody like this or others of his ilk, become a publisher. And the reality is, at some level, it's the amount of content you're publishing, not necessarily the quality. You can get to quality, but if you're not publishing, tisk, tisk, tisk.
So hang on, I just have to say, Jeff didn't tell me I needed to bring my pom-poms, because, so just so you know, David wanted to entitle this panel, "Your Marketing Sucks, and Let Me Tell You Why."
Yep.
Love the frankness, love it. Sorry, Jeff.
No, I think that's a good point, and we hear a lot where people say we don't want to publish too much. We hear that often, where they look at even the inevitability of social media and any form of publication. It's impressions, and it's how many times you can expose yourself, and people, and also stay fresh and be interesting, and tell a good story, of course. But assuming that you have a good story, then you have to tell it. You have to tell it again. You have to repurpose it, and it goes by just like water under the bridge, just continuously. It's never really seen, but at some point somebody does look for it. Like I said, making yourself discoverable is important. Chelli, you want to talk about, say, Michael and David, two friends of ours who have become imminently discoverable?
Yeah, sure. Those are two success stories. I have 3 really bad stories too, if you want those. But the 2 success stories are really great. One is a CEO who was one of my original presenting companies years ago when I was running an investor conference, and he always did great presentations, and he always had great personality, and we been friends for a while. And a few years ago, we had the privilege of being able to start working with one of his new startup companies. It was a very early stage novel oncology small molecule company, and just pre-seed. So they had no budget, and we got them ready for the Biotech Showcase Conference, and we helped them out. And Michael says, you know what, manage, Twitter and LinkedIn and any other publishing, but I'm going to take care of Facebook. And I'm like, okay, we can take care of that for you. And he goes, no, I'm going to take care of it. And you know what? Over the years, I've watched him, and I'm connected to him on Facebook. I see what he publishes. And what he'll do is he will humanize the company's story and share it with his network. Well, this little company that was pre-seed 3 years ago during COVID is now raising their Series B. And he's not posting as much on LinkedIn, but he's managed a network that he had a relationship with in a very successful way. And he's done it really well. Pretty soon he won't be able to do it as much, and whoever, whether it's us or an internal marketing firm or person, is going to need to maintain that personality.
Yeah, I'll just butt in a little bit, because this guy doesn't have a hard time raising money. He's very good, and part of it is because he does stay in touch.
Yeah.
So, I have no doubt that he is communicating in the way that is him. You might not like some of what he says on Facebook. He doesn't care. He's not a brash person either. He's a really... So it's an interesting case in that he is communicating directly. He doesn't have a hard time raising money, because when he does raise money, people have already sort of been following along with him. Now he's at a point, which I want your point on, he's growing up from the grassroots, and from him, like Chelli alluded, you can't do it anymore on his own. He needs other people. He needs to raise more money, and it has to be more than just that people who've been following him, and he needs PR. So David, how does he make that leap from a grassroots personality-driven CEO into, now I need to be covered in national media, Wall Street Journal, attract somebody who's going to give me $150 million?
Interestingly enough, I think the first point, as whether you're CEO, president, whatever your role is inside of the C level, it starts actually with honesty, self-honesty. What is it that you're doing, and how unique is it really? Can you humanize it? A term that I used 20 years ago was, can you explain it so Betty understands? Betty was my mother-in-law, right? Not a stupid person, but man, when she first tried to use a computer, we got some of the craziest questions she just didn't understand, including what happens when your screen would time out and go black, right? She thought she had lost the letter she was working on, but she hadn't. She just needed to move the mouse. So when I think about this individual you're describing here, the more that you can say, okay, I'm honest with myself, on a scale of 0 to 10, we're probably about an 8 or a 7. Can I find something really unique? Dr. Hunter Jackson here at the University of Utah, 25 years ago, when we were working with him, his uniqueness initially was for drug discovery, they were milking spiders. Literally were using tiny little tubes and shocking the abdomen of the spider and milking the venom and looking for potential compounds that we use as from the toxins to treat drugs. And you know what we did? We got a photo of a spider being milked, padded tweezers, on the front page of the business section of the New York Times. It was all about novel discovery opportunities that closed the day before they closed on $9.75 million. But we also got them in Discovery Magazine, other places, because we were using the sexiness, the uniqueness of milking spiders. Does everybody have something like that? No. But if you can't get patents for what you're doing, then you're probably not that unique anyway, right? So find what's unique, find what's sexy if you can, and then tell that story.
So that's a good point and a good example, and not everybody has that story. So Jack, how do people who don't have that kind of thing stand out? Is it the science? Is it the company press? Is it events like these? How do they kind of rise above if they don't have a milking spider in their back pocket?
Not milking this way, okay? This is clear.
And Betty to talk to.
Betty to talk to. Well, look, I love the term humanizing your message, right? So a couple of thoughts. First and foremost, there are very few VCs. First off, there are very few VCs in terms of, a portion of the general workforce anyway, but there are very few VCs that are going to have any idea what you do, right? What your business is, your approach, the specific disease you're trying to, develop a therapeutic for. We just aren't going to know it. So as much as you can dumb down your story, please do, because we're going to need to be taught from the ground up what you're doing. We can probably pattern match with other businesses to a certain extent, but we're not going to understand the market you're addressing, the random weird, things about the specific disease you're working on. We're not going to know it. So the more you can dumb it down, the better. And the other thing I'd say is in this room, presumably everybody is working in the healthcare space, i.e. everybody is working on a very human issue. One of my favorite things that Recursion Pharmaceuticals did from the very early days is they had a wall with photos of patients that represented each one of the diseases that we had a therapeutic we were working on in, that was, that we had a target in. And you'd go in and you had 50 faces, right, that represented a disease that we were working on finding some sort of a treatment for. And in investor meetings, Chris would bring in people, right, he's really great at telling that story. So it brings in this aspect of ownership over, this bigger problem that we're working on. It takes you away from the minutia of the business and, the finances of the company, and it really puts that face on why we're doing this, right? So anyway, I love the term humanizing. So dumb it down for us, and it's very easy to find a face to represent, what you're working on.
There is this interesting aspect, though, to what Recursion has done under Dr. Chris Gibson, which is it wasn't just about the fact that they're looking at all these target therapies and target drugs. It's that they're using supercomputers and AI to identify the opportunities. So now I have the ability to meld a story that says we're attacking this condition, this disease, and we're getting there by using supercomputers and AI and machine learning and LLP. And now I've got a really cool story that the Wall Street Journal can write about. So could the Deseret News. So could the Arizona Star Republic. I mean, it's a story that anybody can get pretty excited about. We're tracking all these diseases and we're using computers and technology to solve these problems. That's cool, right? That's where it gets sexy.
I love that comment. I really appreciate it. And it opens up a broader discussion point here, and that is back to the comment around, like, there's a finite number of people in the world that understand what you're doing, and the number of VCs is even smaller. Be very thoughtful about who your target audience is for VCs. And Recursion was so great about, I love that you brought that up. They're so great about opening it up to somebody like me. Prior to Recursion, I was not a biotech investor. We did a lot in supercomputing. We did a lot in AI. We did a lot in big data sets. And they were starting to hire people from some of our companies that were not biotech background people. They were data scientists. And as I cold called Chris originally, and when I called him, that was part of the conversation. I'm like, why are these people going to work for you? Like, what are you doing that's different? And by taking that approach, one, it's an amazing approach for identifying compounds, but by being able to talk about it like you're mentioning, Dave, Chris is able to bring in an atypical investor into his VC consortium, if you will. And he was able to do that across the board. A lot of the guys that invested in Recursion in the early days were not typical biotech investors. And that's a new trend, right? There are now pure play biotech VCs. But anyway, to the extent that you can expand your story to bring somebody like us in, that's great. It widens your TAM, and just be thoughtful about who your market is.
Yeah, that's a great point. And being able to tell the story to different people in ways that they understand it has to happen. And the opportunity is there too, I think. Talk, Chelli, a little bit about the reluctance of scientists, though, to speak human.
Well, and scientists are brilliant people. You guys, they're creating things. Your head's down. You're focusing on something that you've been working on for 10, 15, 20 years, and I get it. But there comes a time when this brilliance and this brilliant idea needs to come out, and other people need to be able to understand what you're doing for it to grow, and it just so many times I just was thinking today in preparation for the panel. I had this dream client. They were an Italian medical device company, Italian medical device pharmaceutical company. They had the device, they had a generic drug and an orphan drug. And my job, it was such a great job, and I had to go to Italy too, so it was really great. I had to research and map and suggest their U.S. strategy. And we came up with a brilliant strategy. We had a contract CEO out of Harvard Medical School, $3 million in seed funding, the regulatory track to get these things moving. And the scientist, founder, CEO, didn't understand what was going on with it. I'm not sure what happened, but bottom line is he got in a fight with Baxter's scientists. They had $1 million licensing deal with Baxter. He got in a fight with the scientists. They lost the licensing deal. He got in a fight with a disagreement with the U.S. Contract president out of Harvard Medical School, and that deal fell apart, and the company never did come over to the United States. And this is during a time when CHS was saying, we're going to put buco's amount of money into end-stage renal.
But he couldn't, you did this deal, and
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in it, but he didn't want to speak human.
No.
He would literally say, but this is the science. It's important. You have to understand the science.
Right.
He couldn't get out of his own way.
I think part of the challenge then for the scientists, the MDs, the programmers, developers, whatever, really, really smart woman or man who's leading the company, who's come up with this new idea, is to be humble enough to say, I'm really good at this. I may not be very good at messaging. I may not be very good at audience identification. I may not be very good at marketing or at PR. I'm going to go find the right person to be on my team, externally or internally, and I'm going to let them help me tell that story. And the right head of marketing, the right head of PR, the right outside consultant will say, wait a second, you're missing this. It reminds me of me in a meeting with Dr. Hunter Jackson, back to MPS Pharmaceuticals. No, David, we can't meet next month at that time because I'm going to be at a conference. Oh, really? What conference? American Chemical Society annual meeting. Oh, really? What are you doing? I'm presenting a poster. About what? It's not that big of a deal. About what, Hunter? Turns out that using one of those compounds found in the toxin of a venom they had found with mice prevented the deleterious effects of stroke. He had a 10-minute poster presentation, and he didn't think it was a big deal. The head of PR for ACS about, I won't say that. Let's just say she was really excited. Okay. The Associated Press ran 3 separate stories on a 10-minute poster presentation from Dr. Hunter Jackson. And look, okay, fine. I'm patting myself on the back, but the reality is the right marketing person, the right PR person, the right person on your team will say, no, actually, that is a really big deal. You need to talk about that, even though it may be uncomfortable for you. And it's part of what helped drive them forward to an eventually a $5+ billion exit to Shire Pharmaceuticals.
So, I just want to add on to this